So FabFilter Pro-Q4 just dropped this morning. So here are my favorite new features and improvements. Let's jump in. Firstly, I love the new and improved UI. As you can see, I have Pro-Q4 and Pro-Q3 on my screen. As I hover, it already tells me the kind of filter it's going to add. Here I can see this is a low shelf, low cut, double click it, and it adds a low cut. Likewise on the high end. And then here I can see it's a bell filter right off the bat. Sometimes in Pro-Q3, I would click around the low end if I wanted to add a low shelf or a low cut. And let's say I wanted to add a low cut, but I didn't click low enough. It would add a low shelf, click lower, and then it would add a low cut. Likewise on the high end, I would double click it thinking it's a high cut. It ends up being either a bell or a cut or a shelf. So here it clearly tells you in the UI the type of filter you're adding. Secondly, if I hover somewhere on the UI, it shows me the kind of filter it adds and I can see exactly where it's adding it. So as you can see, as I'm moving my mouse, I can see the sort of filter it's adding. I double click it and it adds it. Again, same thing on the low end. This is really convenient when you're working on multiple EQ instances and you're trying to speed up your process. This one I think will really speed up my workflow. A new feature that I absolutely love is this pencil feature right here. So if you click this pencil feature, you can draw a shape of your EQ curves on the screen and Pro-Q4 will automatically add filters to match that shape. So as you can see, I'm going to draw like this, come down here maybe, and then high at the end. And you can see Pro-Q automatically created filters in place to give me that general shape that I wanted. I can always adjust those after if I want to make a filter wider or narrower. I can pull back my low cut. I can change the Q of that low cut as well. This is another really convenient feature because sometimes I know the curves that I want on my EQ, and rather than manually adding filters one by one, drawing those in is a massive, massive performance improvement in regards to how quickly we can make those EQ changes. The next feature that I absolutely love is the new Spectral Dynamic EQ filter. So generally, as you'd make a dynamic EQ, so if I was to bring this down dynamically as the song plays, you can see that filter is being triggered dynamically. However, now in Pro-Q4, you have the option to change this to a spectral filter. So if I click this, I can change it to medium, low, or high. And now you'll see what happens every time that filter gets triggered. So when I disable it, this works similar to Sonible's Smart EQ. So now you can have a static filter or a filter that works in spectral mode. So I think that's really convenient. Another feature you have now is a character feature where you can add some saturation. You can either add a clean, subtle, or warm saturation. So if you think about your hardware EQs, typically they have a sound to them. They have character. I do have other EQs that I use for color. So for saturation, for sound, or for tone. But now Pro-Q4 actually has this built in. So you can play around with those. And again, it just subtly changes the character of the sound that is going through the EQ. The next feature we're going to talk about is one of my favorites, which is the enhancements on sidechaining capabilities. So I've sidechained my drum bus to my 808. So now when my drums play, you'll see that signal coming through in my 808 EQ. So we can disable the pre and the post. So now we're only looking at the sidechain. So we're analyzing the sidechain signal. So let's assume every time the kick comes through, you want to duck down that 808. Well, typically what you would do is you'd add a filter, whether it's a bell or we can put a low shelf, and you'd make it dynamic. And here you'd click that arrow and say sidechain. That's this little icon right here. And what happens is every time you'll see that the drums will play, it'll duck down that filter. But let's say you wanted to duck down a wider range. So you didn't want to just trigger it over here. Let's say you wanted to trigger it from over here. What would happen now that it's sidechaining, that sidechain filter is getting triggered from 700 and below. So every time the snare hits, that sidechain will get triggered as well. You see? And this is important because you won't always have access to the kick stems. Oftentimes you'll only have access to the drum bus. And what you can do here now is you can click where it says band and you can click on free. So now you can say only trigger the sidechain when there's signal coming through within this spectrum here. So from 30 Hertz, or I can make it below from 10 Hertz all the way to 100. And anything beyond 100, just ignore that. So now when I play, you'll see it's only the kick that actually triggers that sidechain. If you wanted to sidechain, let's say the snare, so you wanted to duck down the low frequencies in an EQ that don't match the sidechain, you can now have granular control either of the sidechain independently from the filter. So I think that's so convenient. And each filter has an independent sidechain trigger. So if I add a second filter here that I wanted to trigger on a certain frequency, I can do that. So you don't always have to correlate the filter with the signal that is coming through your sidechain. You can independently select the frequency range each filter. This is a game changer for me. I love having this feature because now you have dynamic filters, each independently being triggered by whatever frequency range you want. So if you want a very narrow range to trigger a wide filter, you can do that. And again, each filter has its own range. And the last feature I want us to look at is the grouping feature. This one is a little bit similar to Sonible's Smart EQ, but now if you have multiple instances on different channels, you can click right here. So now if you want to go through the different channels, you can do that. I can scroll down and I can see each one. I can change the sizing of these. I can click inside, I can make adjustments. And if you enable this hotspot, you can see where there's masking happening. So it shows you where there's overlapping sound coming. So if you have multiple ones, you can analyze multiple channels at the same time and see where there's any conflicting frequencies. So as you can see, this is not an exhaustive video, but these are my favorite new features. I do think the enhancements will speed up my workflow. I've only used it for a few hours, like I mentioned, but already I absolutely love the improvements. Let me know if you got yourself a trial or if you got yourself a copy. What do you think of FabFilter's Pro-Q4? And until next time, I hope this inspired you to go and make some music. Peace.